What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Meran podcast. Today, my guest is Jason Arens. Jason is a skier, FIS judge, and marketing director at Surface Skis and Joystick Poles. He's heavily involved in the ski industry as he's been traveling the world judging the biggest events for years now. Some of those include Dew Tour, X Games, World Cups, and recently the Olympics in China. Aside from that, Jason is a great guy who's also extremely passionate and knowledgeable about skiing. In this episode, we talked in detail about competitions, judging, X Games, World Cups, the Olympics, and much, much more. We had so much stuff on our plate that our discussion will be split into two parts, so enjoy part one and be on the lookout for part two dropping soon. Big thanks to the patrons on Patreon, Will Cameron and Raf Diaz, and also to the sponsors of this episode, Axis Board Shop, Planks Clothing, and Dick Ann's Restaurants. Let's go! Mr. Jason Arens, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Stoked to make this happen.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. We've been chatting for a couple of months to get you on board, and I'm stoked to do these business episodes where I talk to a lot of pro skiers and we talk about the skiing side, but I did episodes with Jason Leventhal and with Felix Rioux, and I really enjoy talking about the business side and maybe about other angles of the ski industry that we don't get to hear often.
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like in every aspect, I've fixed myself into a situation where I'm working in maybe a slightly less predictable avenue of the ski industry, and it's something maybe I wouldn't have anticipated a decade ago, but wanting to be involved with skiing and being interested in the sport really can do a lot to drive your direction.
And it's really cool to talk to you because I think you're a really great example of someone who's big, quote unquote, in the industry. Like, you know everyone, you've been everywhere, you work with the biggest events and brands, and yet to the main public, your name might be unknown.
Yeah, I guess as a judge specifically, it's better if you're unknown. I feel like we saw with the snowboarding in the Olympics when a lot of their names started to be recognized for the wrong reasons, and that I feel like it's something a bit behind the curtains for the most part. But I have been had the ability over the past decade to go to a lot of these big events and really see how they all work, and really judging's been a pretty interesting path that, again, like, I really did not think 15 years ago that this was going to be the avenue that I would necessarily pursue. But yeah, it's an interesting world.
We'll get to talk about that later, but you've opened the door and I got to get into it. Should Max Sparrow have won?
Oh, I mean, that one is tough. We've discussed this at length, and me not being a snowboard judge, obviously they have different ways that they look at everything. The SBS system that we used at the Olympics, in which the sections take account for a certain percentage of the score, and then your overall impression takes a percentage of the score, and it's all calculated based on different judges' inputs at different rates. That was created by snowboarding, pretty much to mitigate risk in events like this, to be able to prevent situations in which snowboarders had too much on their plate, and skiers in general, to this entire sport, so that you're not factoring in too much when you're considering a run. So the SBS system, like, in the way that it was created to be able to, let's say, break it down so they only had to focus on one jump, ended up kind of being the downfall, in which they didn't have enough eyes maybe really focusing on that one trick. So there were mistakes in all the top three runs for snowboarding. Realistically, I like to think that I would have caught the knee grab, but by the time we got into the booth for slopestyle, we were so hyper focused on making sure that we didn't mess anything up. And I wasn't even judging. I was in the back seat as a trick caller. So yeah, we were very hyper focused. So it's a tough call. The one that I was most shocked about was the snowboard halfpipe event with that whole controversy, because that one just was yeah, I was watching that one from the base and just disagreeing in real time.
I'm not familiar. I don't think I've seen it. What was the thing about that?
Oh wow, okay, so yeah, it was Ayumu Hirano versus Scotty James. Scotty James came down second run, laced a run, got 92 something. It was a great run, super technical, way more technical than anyone else is doing. Ayumu, who qualified first, I believe, dropped in last, drops the triple on the first hit, has several 14s in his run, has crazy amplitude, comes down. Consensus was this was a clear first place. Like this thing was a 90. This is the best half pipe run I had ever seen. Period. Like my initial impression. And he fell into second place, for which everybody, the snowboard world, erupted. They lost it. Like Todd Richards was on air griping with it, with judges by name, calling them out. So it
Shit.
was, yeah, it was a pretty big thing. Luckily, Ayumu came down, laced his third run, got like a 96 or something, did the exact same run, almost mirrored it identically. Uh, but he ended up winning, and it ended up kind of skirting that problem, I guess. So, but it was still big talk in the snowboard world.
Yeah, a big thing on the Canadian side with the Max Perot thing was like, I think Mark McMorris kind of dissed him on social, and then it was kind of a big fuss because it's the national team and he's a teammate, and then he had to apologize. And the Olympics seemed to bring a lot of political correctness to all of that, also of kind of sticking to your national team and having a different vibe than X Games, maybe on that side.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it is the Olympics change skiing. There's no way around that. It took it from like you're traveling around contests with your buddies, like the people that you chose to be with, or wherever your proximity in life put you, and you ended up traveling with those guys. And now it's all national teams. You're traveling with your people from your country. So the national part really does come into play quite a bit. It's interesting in that respect. But then you see like Big Air when all the skiers are still at the bottom, hugging and supporting each other.
Yeah.
Like Henrik, so stoked that he got third place and so hyped for those two dudes that beat him in Big Air. It's like this is what the sport is about, and that's I feel like the spirit in which we all wanted to get involved with this sport. So um, yeah, it's sets up some interesting parts of that. But yeah, I feel like the media specifically around that Max versus Mark thing was pretty interesting, and the whole that anytime there's an inch of room to be able to criticize judging in any respect, like you see how it's happened in figure skating in years past, and right or wrong, people love to be able to squeak in there and be able to fit an opinion and yeah, be able to create drama, I guess, at wherever they might find a way.
As someone who's considers myself an expert in skiing, I'm always like kind of trying to stay humble on that end, because how do you differentiate a 91.5 between a 92.2? And I
Totally.
think that's where X Games comes in and changes it up to have a jam format where we don't see the score, and trying to take that away, and we'll get to talk about that. But yeah, beforehand, I think you stated quite clearly that you're a ski connoisseur. Tell me a bit about your background. Like, let's go back to the beginning, because you're heavily involved in the industry nowadays. But what's your where? Tell me a bit about you. Like, where are you from? How'd you get into skiing? Like, what's the backstory of Jason?
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm in South Lake Tahoe right now. This is my hometown where I grew up. I had been in Portland for the last 5 years, but got married this past summer, and my wife and I came back to do a year in Tahoe, close to the family. But yeah, born and raised in South Lake Tahoe. Grew up skiing a little bit and didn't really take a huge interest in it until probably I was 14, 15, when a couple of my friends got into it, and that was about the time that I saw my first ski movie, which was Ready Fire Aim. One of my buddies had Session 1242. We were watching those on repeat, and I was kind of hooked from that point on. Just got really obsessed with skiing, like kind of let all my other sports that I had done fall by the wayside, and really got involved in skiing, watching all the videos, wanting to go out and film with my friends. Wasn't necessarily good at it at the beginning at all. Like really was just tagging along with a group of friends. But over the years started, really trying to progress my skiing, do contests, did the contest circuit for a couple years with the last few years of the US Open, Aspen Open, squeaked into a couple years of Dew Tour towards the end of my competitive career, always in slopestyle, was not much of a half pipe skier at all. Uh,
And sorry, and what year are we talking about in those days?
so let's say, I think Dew Tour I must have judged in, or not judged, so I competed in Dew Tour, I would say in 2009 through 11 ish range.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the first year that I judged it was 2014. So yeah, I went like from competing in Dew Tour. I think the US Opens that I competed in were maybe 2007, 2008 US Opens. And then I believe 2009 maybe was the final year of it. But so yeah, competed in slopestyle through the years. Was not particularly good. Took an interest in kind of doing the filming route, line traveling circus. I think really heavily inspired a lot of people in that day and age to get out with your buddies with a camera. So yeah, we started Good Enough, which was at first just myself and Noah Curry. Just going out to Boreal and pointing a camera at each other. It was a GoPro at the time. I think it was a GoPro Hero 2 that we were, just passing back and forth and filming, and ended up, kind of turning into a thing for a couple years. Recruited our buddy Garrett Jurich from, who Noah grew up with. He had been living in Sacramento filming skateboarding. Brought him back. He was our filmer, and that was kind of where it took off, and got Pete Arneson, Kai Capella involved, a bunch of other guys, that ended up being, like some of my best friends, people that I traveled with for years, and as we did these Good Enough videos, and the Good Enough stuff was kind of, I guess, towards the end of my contest when I stopped focusing on contests, when I kind of realized that I didn't think I had the juice to really compete at these contests at high level for a long time. Because I mean, the people I started competing against were Joss, Slopey, Gus, Bobby, like the guys that, I mean, tried and proven they had what it took, and I was being compared right up against them, and I didn't feel like I really had the competitive drive to compete at their level. So that's what kind of led me into the filming aspect of it and just kind of hanging out. Still, again, enjoying skiing, like big ski fan over here. And yeah, that's what led me to judging, was actually meeting Pete Arneson through skiing and filming Good Enoughs. He had gotten recruited by Steele Spence to start judging contests,
Mm.
and Pete hanging out with us was like, "Hey, yeah, you're pretty critical and are kind of a dick about this stuff. So yeah, do you want to give this a try? Like, you think you'd be interested in judging?" And he gave me my first him and Steele Spence allowed for my first opportunity to step in the booth officially, and that's kind of where it all started.
And now it's time for a first sponsor break. I'm stoked to have Dickens Restaurants as a sponsor once again this season. I've been a lifetime fan, so I'm always happy to share the good word. Dickens is a family owned fast food restaurant chain with 12 locations in the Montreal region. They've been famous since 1954 for their great food, especially their flat hamburgers and their spicy sauce. Talking about their sauce, it's been available since last year in many Metro grocery stores all over Quebec. Dickens is my number one fast food spot, so if you come by Montreal, you gotta check it out. Support companies that support skiing, support Dickens restaurants. You mentioned we'll get to talk about how you started judging, but I want to touch on your fellow competitors, because it seems like skiing has evolved so much, but at each stage there are these special guys that make you think, okay, I'm not gonna go to X Games. Like you said, you were in the generation of Joss and Bobby, and I remember like when Bobby came up. I don't know if you remember also, but when he posted the first time before doing his switch dub Misty at X Games, I remember on my end seeing that and being like, what the fuck are these guys up to? Like the first time I saw the switch dub Misty 12, it seemed like the gnarliest thing ever, where I was like, okay, he's like 18. What are these kids up to? And I want to know, like, on your end, what was your thinking in that sense of you were trying to compete, and as you said, you weren't like going to be the next Olympic medalist, and then there was still the option of filming for movies or edits, like you said, with traveling circus. What was your thinking at that time? Like, there's some guys that really push it and try to make it in the comp scene. There's others that kind of understand it quickly that maybe it's not my thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that was I always I liked the contests. Like I really from an early age, I feel like in the contests, I had the idea that I was competing against myself more than I was competing against everyone around me. But I feel like the real time when you start to take inventory of it is when you realize the financial burden it costs to continue to do these contests when you understand that
Right.
your competitive interests do not align with actually, all right, it's last run and I got that trick in the bag that I haven't tried before. I was never the one that was going to do something outside of my bounds that I wasn't going to land on my feet that day in the contest in order to try to win. And I mean, I met Bobby at Wendell's years ago. We were both, or yeah, just sessioning a jump. That was before his first like U.S. Open big breakthrough performance, and just skiing at a like close proximity with those guys. I always just felt like they had maybe a competitive level in their head that I didn't really understand. I never really went there. I never really maybe had the drive or who knows athletic ability even to compete with those guys, and they're athletes at such a crazy level. And Bobby, seeing him go from like a kid that I'm sessioning jumps with to over the next 6 years, he became the face of free skiing. He was the biggest. He was winning everything, and he wasn't sponsored by Solomon at the time that I even met him. He was sponsored by Fatty Puss. We were hiking this jump. Next year at the U.S. Open, that's when he got connected with Solomon. That's when he did it. He was doing double backflips and kangaroo flips, and that's what was like putting him on the map. And it was really, I feel like my competitive career apex at the time when people were starting to do doubles, and I went from like, okay, I can compete at a high level with both switch tens to now doubles are a thing, and I don't know about this. So yeah, really, I feel like doubles were really what weeded me out of it, and I didn't have the motivation to really try to chuck with those guys.
Yeah, you touched on something good about athletic abilities. To me, it seems like it's mental abilities. To
Totally,
it
yeah.
seems like some of these guys, they have the mental ability to not set any boundaries on what they can do. They'll come one year and push themselves and to a new level, and then the year after that they do it again, and then they do it again, and that's what allows them to keep up. And it really seems like a special skill that a few guys have, because there's some guys that have like, I think maybe I've said it a lot of times on the podcast, but a good example to me is ABM, where he wasn't necessarily the next Wallish when he was young, but he just kept improving every year to a point where he was still relevant at Big Air in 2021. And
Most definitely. I mean,
at that point, it's not even technical abilities; it's the mental ability to like keep thinking further and keep pushing yourself.
very much so. Yeah, and I mean, I think another great example of like the mental capacity of this thing would be Nick Gepper or David Wise, like two people that have now been through all three cycles of Olympics that free skiing has had at the Olympics and have managed to be on the podium at all three. Um, if you like you at the rate that this sport progresses, you would not think that that's physically possible. You look at the landscape of where skiing was that 8 years ago versus today, and you would not think with the fact that we saw a 2160 this year, we saw nose butter 1980s, and the fact that the Olympic gold medalist from halfpipe in 2014 got a bronze in 2022, and
Hmm.
like that's mind game. Like these guys are so mentally strong, understand that it's not about being the best skier, it's about winning that contest that day, putting the the best spin on whatever the conditions allow for that day. And
Yeah.
yeah, really, it's a head game. But ABM, I'd say is a great example of that because yeah, he came in and when you're sheerly talking about the rotation count of what the people were doing at the time, and for him to come in to a big air at X Games and spin a full 360 less than everybody else on every trick, but still have tricks that are relevant in that level, that speaks to someone's understanding of what they're doing and yeah, understanding of themselves in that competitive environment.
Yeah, you said something about half pipe, but I think we'll talk about that later. I want to have your take on it. So let's you were talking about you started judging with steel spence getting you into that. Um, Steel Spence, which for people who were or maybe younger, who was a pro skier on forefront, all that stuff, filming with Level One, who then went on to be was he head judge at some point of like AFP?
Um, yeah, so Steele like obviously had such a crazy professional career and was like huge for years. And he actually, before letting me into judging, Steele was the one that really got my buy into judging when he first took over the AFP, as you're talking about. I don't know what his official position with the AFP was, but he was, in my mind, the spokesperson for the AFP, the spokesperson for judging at the time. That we sat down at one athlete meeting and they kind of explained how judging was going to go moving forward, and it
Mm.
was Steele's words, Steele's face, and that was the first time that I had ever walked out of a room feeling like, wow, judging is on track. You know, like I understand now what I'm being judged on, and I agree to it because that's the philosophy by which this sport was founded, you know. So like I'm on board. And prior to that, it's almost like it was a mystery. You had no idea how these contests were being judged. And then Steele, I feel like, was a big part of putting a face and an understanding on judging to free skiing. You know, I mean, for me, he did so much for me as a competitor and my understanding of the contest that I was entering into. So yeah, he like had a huge ski career, but then what he's done for judging over the years, I think is uh, it would be hard to match within the skiing realm.
We can say that Steele is mostly responsible for the modern judging way of free skiing, let's say.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas before that, it was kind of YOLO, just
very much so. Yeah,
who impresses everyone the most.
yeah, yeah. I feel like the AFP specifically, I think that was their whole goal was just to standardize this a little bit with the understanding that the Olympics were on the horizon. At that time, I think it was still theoretical. Um, but yeah, they were that was the first at least force that I had seen within skiing that was trying to put yeah put a transparent view of what the judging process was, because yeah, prior to that it could have been anything. You know, I remember watching X Games as a kid and not even understanding what I'm really watching, you know, like
Hmm.
just like this is crazy. Like how do you put this against this? Like what are the
Yeah.
criteria? Are there criteria? Were the criteria explained to the athletes? Who came up with the criteria? So the AFP and Steele specifically, I think, took a lot of that on himself.
Well, I remember going on what you said about watching it as a kid. I remember watching the Dumont versus Tanner Hall battles,
Oh
and
yeah,
that was exactly it. Like Simon was going bigger, but he was having less hits, and Tanner was going smaller, but he had more hits. So how do you how do you judge that? Tanner had 7 hits, Simon had 5. Uh,
exactly.
like
Simon
what the
Simon's
fuck?
going 20 feet out on hit one. Like Tanner's got a consistent 11 feet on every air. Like yeah, and at that point in time, what are they judging on? You know, like
Yeah.
and that's kind of I think when it became clear, like okay, like there there is a need for this to be transparent. You know, like figure skating. How many people watch figure skating versus actually understand what they're being judged on? Like I'd say it's a very small percentage of people that actually comprehend the judging method, and with any sport that's going to be the same. And the vast majority of criticism you face are people that don't understand what you're actually judging on. But we lived in an era of the sport in the early ages when that was all being figured out, you know, and they were just trying to yeah piece it together year by year with awarding yeah progression versus cleanliness versus landing. Like you actually have to land something. Like can't just do a crazy trick because it's never been done and not land on your feet. That's a big part of it.
And then there's a lot of terms that are kind of not unclear, but that can mean different things. like progression.
Totally. Yeah.
Like you can
What does that relate
progress,
to?
quote unquote, but do something super wacky also. Like,
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and there's progression in so many avenues, and
mhm.
what is progression? Is it progression for the sport as a whole? Because very few people have the ability to touch progressing the sport on a whole, but is it progressive for that day, for that contest, for that course, for that feature? Potentially.
And now it's time for another sponsor break. Planks Clothing has been making rad ski gear for rad humans since 2009. If you're part of the lucky ones who are still skiing, they've got you covered for dry slope or summer glacier sessions with riding hoodies, bibs, pants, and more. If you're like me and you're in summer mode, they've also got great streetwear for your off-season missions on and off the hill. Planks Clothing is a dope brand that mixes quality with style at an affordable price. Go check them out at planksclothing.com. Support companies that support skiing, support Planks Clothing. Yeah. And yeah, I think it was a lot of unwritten rules, let's say, where we knew that getting a good grab for a long time was good. We knew that going big was good, but it wasn't written per se. Like
Exactly.
it was all yeah, unwritten rules, and you kind of had to put it all together in a structured manner because if I remember correctly, a big push to get it into the Olympics was a big part was to show that it was a serious sport and structured in some kind of way. And now thinking back to it, a big factor must be the judging part. Like, hey, how are you judging your sport? How do you go about it?
Yeah.
And then you have to come up with something structured.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because that's really what everyone's fighting for in the competitive realm is just an understanding, and you can only get an understanding from structure and consistency. But I do believe that was a big part of the early part of free skiing was just proving its legitimacy, for better or worse. And like obviously at this point, it's withstood the test of time. It's a pretty dominant, in my opinion, Olympic event in terms of like actually bringing in public attention. And now we're dealing with the other sides of it. Okay, now we have structured this sport, but it takes away a bit from the free element for which this sport was created. Because at the end of the day, this whole sport derives from freestyle, moguls, and aerials, which free skiing was created in spite of, in order to get away from the rules and restrictions, the structure of that sport. So it's kind of, I feel like we're always going to be in limbo between this free sport that now has structure and restrictions, at least in the competitive realm. Like that's, and I feel like we'll get into this later, but like with street skiing and everything, there's so much more versatility and acceptance as to what you can and can't do versus competitive skiing that now it's like it's relatively structured. It is free skiing. We're not telling them what they can and cannot do. However, those guys know what they need to do more or less to compete at a high level. And if they don't do that, it's very obvious when they don't do that.
You touched on something that I think opens up a lot of discussions inside skiing, which is you know, the roots of freedom versus the obligation to have some rules if you want to have competitions because that you just need them if you want to have comps. Hot take moment. What did you think of the polls, no polls controversy at the beginning of the season for Big Air?
Yeah, I mean it's been a huge
Maybe
conversation for the
as
last.
a sorry, maybe as a judge and also on your personal end as a skier.
Yeah, as a judge, um, so it's so complicated. Like it really, the polls versus no poll. I loved it because I think that the only way we can have rules, like air quotes rules, enforced in this sport, if it really is cultural norms in which people just understand that that's what's expected. I would love it if everyone used polls. I would love it if everyone felt guilty for not using polls in Big Air because I genuinely feel it levels the playing field in a way in which now you can't call into question grabs being more or less difficult with a pole in your hand versus no pole in your hand because clearly it is going to be more difficult to accomplish the same trick, same grab with a pole in your hand than without a pole in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
From a non-competitive standpoint, I why does it matter? Like I feel like it's all stylistic preference. It's what they want to do.
Yeah.
But I really feel like we're in this another like a fine line because of the airbags. Airbags have given everybody the ability to learn all these things without poles because you're not allowed to use poles on airbags.
Oh,
And
okay. I didn't
when
know
they,
that.
yeah, I mean, you pop it, so
Yeah,
you're not allowed to. So now everybody learns these tricks without poles, and it takes a while for them to maybe to feel comfortable with poles.
right.
Um, so I was all for the argument because I like poles. I back it if everyone used poles. But as devil's advocate, who cares? Like at the same time, because it's personal preference. This is free skiing. At what point, if we're now going to mandate poles, are we going to mandate length of skis? Like
Yeah.
what's the minimum length of ski to do this contest? And I remember I was competing in the Aspen Open, in which Tom Wallish dropped and did what would have been a clearly winning run with no poles and received zeros from half the judges, straight up
Wow.
zeros.
I
And
remembered that story and I wanted to tell you about that because it was like the best example, but I didn't remember he got zeros.
zeros, he got zeros.
Wow. And like who were the judges? Like because that's real hate.
That's real hate, and that's something that I feel like judges, we are in a dangerous place to set precedent in skiing, and that's not our job. Like our job is to evaluate what happened that day. We are not tastemakers. We are not people that are pushing for any one particular direction in skiing. And I think that day, uh, yeah, that was an interesting day. That at that day they said, nope, this doesn't fly. Like you literally just did the winning run, but you get a zero because you didn't use poles, and we're not cool with that.
Again, going back to the rules, no rules, and freedom aspect versus like going away from moguls, all that stuff. When I saw the debate regarding poles, no poles, it seems like nowadays the cool kids wanted to wear poles, but I remembered 15 years ago when Wallish was the cool kid and he wasn't wearing poles. So I was like, well, it changes with time, I guess. Like
It's
it
cyclical.
all goes back to yeah, kind of cyclical. Like baggy was cool, and now and there was a phase where it was skinny pants, and it all goes around kind of. So
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, as somebody that like works for a pole company, I I like this debate is hilarious to me, you know, like I really uh like poles are the like such a crucial element to skiing, but so unnecessary at the same time. So yeah, it really did seem like it. At times, I feel like skiing a little bit maybe has like a, I don't know if I want to call it a bully element, but like the cool kids are pushing for one way, and if you see things the other way, then you've fallen outside of that circle, and that's almost what it felt like. Just was, hey, contest year is about to start. We're gonna make an attempt to shift the way that this year goes in regards to this, for better or worse for them. They made a statement, and it became like a hugely contested point of conversation, and again, like I think it is something that needs to be evaluated because that was like the biggest conversation piece towards the end of the contest year. Coaches saying like, "What about polls versus no polls?" And it's like, all right, man, like to have any real change happen in the judging realm, we need to hear this from majority athlete base at a high level at once, pretty much. Like we need to have the entire World Cup circuit tell us one day, hey, polls, yes, no polls are out. That's
kind
it.
of a
And
referendum.
exactly, because again, we're not the ones that are trying to set precedent in this. We're trying to evaluate based on what they're doing. We're not trying to decide the direction in which the sport goes on a day-to-day basis.
And you kind of don't want old people at FIS making the decision for you. Like it kind of needs to
Exactly.
come internally.
Well, that's the other whole thing in. So I work with FIS as the education coordinator. Myself and David Ortlieb, who is the head judge of the Olympics, are like handling the free ski program for FIS, and so we're like I feel like David, for anyone who doesn't know, is a like longtime OG skier. I grew up competing against him as well when he was living in the States from Switzerland. Sammy Ortlieb, his older brother. Um, but David and I are very protective of skiing, you know. So anytime there's any type of rule change that's coming through FIS, like for example, the fluoro bans and everything with wax, like that doesn't really affect skiing and everything, but we still are evaluating these things and really scrutinizing them as to these matters that come up as to do they affect skiing in a way that they're not affecting these other sports, free skiing, let's say, in a way that they're not touching these other sports, because that's really what I feel like we are, is just protectors more or less of this sport and trying to keep it controlled by free skiing, not by outside elements or people that are short-sightedly making decisions without necessarily comprehending the effects that it might have on this sport specifically.
And now it's time for another sponsor break. Access Board Shop is the dopest shop in skiing. They've been in business for 20 years and are still passionate about everything related to skiing. If you need to update some of your ski gear, they've got you covered with some great deals on a lot of stuff from this past season. And if you need some stuff for the summer season, they've got you covered with a bunch of products like glasses, shoes, streetwear, skateboards, and much more. Support companies that support skiing, support Access Board Shop. And yeah, as you touched on quickly, but I think to me that's the most important thing. To me, the poles versus no poles argument is kind of not meaningless, but it's not super important. If there's one thing where I'd put, if there are to be rules, I'd put it on the ski length, because
Right.
I have a racing background, and that's a thing in racing. Even though it's kind of stupid, because in racing it's the first one who gets downhill. So my personal taste would be like whatever length you want to have, if you're able to ski the course well. Because if you have smaller skis, you're not going to go as fast. If you have longer skis, you're going to have a harder time handling the course. So it's kind of
Yeah,
personal
a little bit.
preference at some point.
Exactly. Yeah.
But to me, in big air, there's really that risk of going all in aerial style. If you have like 155s of skis, like it's never clear like what size people have, but there's always that kind of thing where you see some guys and you're like, okay, what lengths are your skis?
Totally.
But then
Yeah,
also
I mean
it goes
that's
back to freedom of like,
it,
if you like snowblades, then that's your thing.
and then I mean, like I remember watching Max Gorham go like cruising through Park Lane or Freeway at Breckenridge, and I don't know how tall Max is, but he always rode the K2 190 somethings, and you're like, dude, that's clearly more difficult because you're on a gigantic ski like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, in my opinion, there's no arguing that. Like a longer ski will make it more complicated to do those tricks. So like I completely agree. I really think before, like the poles versus no poles, yeah, that's a debate to have, and I think culturally for skiing and the way skiing wants to be perceived, that does need to be taken into account. But I do think the ski length is a similar issue, because if people start using poles but 140s, what does our sport look like? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are we all it really takes is somebody deciding and like continuing down that route, that they decided these shorter skis are more advantageous to their flipping and spinning, and we could easily lose track of it, and everybody could be competing on skis well shorter than we're used to seeing. And is that skiing? Like at what point is it something that we're not proud to call free skiing, proud to be associated with?
Because I might be wrong, but I think in racing there's just a size limit to the skis, like a minimal size, and you got to deal with it whether you're small or big. That's
Exactly, yeah.
that's the minimum, and that would just seem stupid to me. Also, when because it's easy to think of a rule, but when you got to implement it, then you find out that sometimes it's kind of dumb once you implement it. Because what if there's a minimal size for everyone, and then you got to go? You have a Hall who's a 6'4", let's say, and Matej who's a 5'6".
Exactly. And
Why
like
should they have to deal with the same ski size?
exactly, and what is the calculation between height and weight? And yes, like how long does your ski need to be? Like I mean, again, working for a ski company, it's hard to give people an exact, hey, this is the size ski you should use,
Mm-hmm.
this is what you're going to be comfortable on. And yeah, we're walking a thin line with that stuff, and it really is an interesting topic, because like again, we're coming from this sport that was created to not have rules, and now this structure, I'll not call it rules because that just makes it sound like we're losing this battle, but yeah, the structure to it, what shape does that structure come into, and like it are it do we start limiting ski sizes? And like there is a lot of talk about that. I do hear it get thrown around more so as tossing shade on competitors that other competitors behind their back might think their skis are a little bit short and maybe they should be harsh for it. But like as a judge, how? Like in what capacity am I able to um, uh, reduce from somebody's performance because of arbitrary ski length? And I don't even know what length their ski is. It's not like it says it on a piece of paper. It's not like we go and inspect everybody at the top of the course and make sure that their skis come up to their nose. You know,
And then that's a scary. If we get there, that's a scary place where
totally.
it's we've lost the free skiing culture. Like, and that's always a, as you said, it's a balance to have, I guess, between enough structure so it's a serious sport, but also not too much where you lose the spirit of it all.
Totally. And I mean, you look at snowboarding too, and I think it's really become distinct in the separation between contest and snowboarding. Because now it's like, uh, it is that there's so many other cool aspects to snowboarding that completely fall outside the contest realm. And skiing is still small enough in which we have somebody like Alex Hall that is not only one of the best contest skiers in the world, but is also putting out video parts that are rivaling anything that's ever been put out, and then getting into the backcountry and being able to ski that at a really high level. So uh, I really think that like we kind of have a lot of crossover in skiing where core skiing is a lot more invested in contest skiing than core snowboarding is invested in contest snowboarding,
Okay.
in my opinion. However, the Olympics change all of that. Like that's just such a visible event that everybody has an opinion on.
Do they have any of these debates in snowboarding regarding, like, let's say, board sizes or board width or?
I I mean, I'm sure they do. I know that like for snowboarding, the stance was a really like a thing that they would discuss for a while. And like I know Shaun White has a really wide stance. But again, like to my understanding of snowboarding, does a wide stance help or hurt you? I'm not really sure if it what it does. Like,
But then
and
again,
I
it
don't think
might be to each his own. Like, some people might
exactly,
like one better. Because to
exactly,
go back to people who with smaller skis, at some point, I think to myself, like, is that some kind of maybe it's a like second degree kind of unknown in their mind, but like kind of jealousy of like, oh, he's in front of me, but it's because he has smaller skis. And at some point, it's like, well, you can get
right.
smaller skis too if you want. Will that change
And
the
like,
the outcome?
at what point could you ever put Alex Hall or Andre Getley on a pair of skis that is as much taller than them than like what Matei uses, you know, like
Hmm.
uh those guys are 6'4", 6'5". Like most ski companies don't really go into the 190s in the park ski
Yeah.
range. So you're used like I don't know what A Hall used in a contest, let's say a 186 or something. That's a huge ski and it's still like he's taller than it because he's a tall guy. Like I just think yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I'm curious as to where it's going to go. Um, does it create an advantage to have a different length of ski? I think we've seen at times it does. People are flipping and spinning at a rate that I never thought possible. And when they go a little shorter on the skis, maybe that makes it easier. Maybe it makes it a little harder to land. Maybe it makes for a little bit less landing surface, but looks to be able to cut down on spin weight when they're doing 19s and stuff in the air.
Yeah, it's I think we could go on for hours about that subject,
Yeah,
but
totally.
it's definitely interesting when you have the historical context of free skiing, from like the rebellious roots to Wallish. That's his super unknown was mostly without poles, and he was the coolest guy. And now it's you know because when I go into a park, there's not that debate. There's a lot of people that have poles. There's a lot of people that don't have poles, and no one cares. It's really when it comes down to the competition side, it seems. And even in video parts,
Totally.
if you have poles or no poles, no one cares.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I really do think it's only affecting the contest world, like period, because we have come far enough that when you see somebody skiing without poles in the park on a normal day, it's personal preference. You know, that person
Hmm.
didn't want to use poles. Maybe even that day. Maybe they just didn't want to use poles that day. But in the contest realm, it's like a now looked at as a competitive advantage, I guess, to not use poles because they're they don't have to worry about this added element in the grab. And like that is a point, you know, that is it does make it more difficult, but how much more difficult, you know, and like to get into the weeds of judging for a moment, like judging is based on a ranking, not a score. So if we're now deducting scores because of the need to harsh them for not using polls, what does that amount to? Because we're not using the scores, don't mean anything. We're just ranking. So it's like you
Well,
can't deduct points from an arbitrary number and expect it to mean anything.
let's get into the weeds. I'm down. Um, I did an episode with Mick Kingsbury, who's the, I don't know if you're familiar, he's
Oh yeah,
the
the
mogul
legend,
goat.
the
Yeah.
goat,
But I
absolute
was
goat.
surprised by how many people don't know him, but he's a great dude, incredible skier. And in the episode, he kind of gave me a crash course on the fine details of how moguls work. Because as much as we all know moguls, the actual competitions and judging and how it works, it was really interesting to hear the details. So, yeah, give me a crash course on how skiing judging works.
Yeah, yeah, no, no problem. I'll start with the basics of free ski judging, which is traditionally has been an overall impression judging
Hmm.
base, which just means that we're factoring in everything into the whole run, not like assigning scores to specific assets of the run. The five criteria that we evaluate overall impression being progression, amplitude, variety, execution, and difficulty. So the five criteria that they're being weighed on, obviously, as we kind of discussed earlier, those can have wildly different perspectives as to what each of those criteria really means. Amplitude obviously is like relatively standard, both on a jump and half pipe. Half pipe, it's very noticeable. Jumps for amplitude, you're really, did the person clear the jump? Did they knuckle? Did they come up short?
Do you also consider for amplitude? The first thing we think is like, did you land on the knuckle or did you land in the Gucci plateau? But also, do you consider the pop? Because there's some people that go far but don't really pop on jumps, and then there's others that go to the moon.
Totally, very much so, and like that's I usually try to explain amplitude the way it's judged in slopestyle and big air as trajectory,
Okay.
um, because that kind of combines the pop with the length down the jump. Obviously, you don't want somebody going having a very flat takeoff and taking it to the bottom of the jump, or I mean, we're not trying to promote people overshooting the jump either. We're trying to promote an adequate amount of airtime for that specific feature with a good pop, good takeoff, landing in a uh, pre-designed place to land. You know, you're not landing on the knuckle, you're not landing close to the top of the landing, you're landing on the landing somewhere. You know, and obviously you can go bigger, you can have better pop, you can go longer down the landing, but that's where amplitude is really defined in slopestyle and big air, rather than just half pipe. It's so obvious. It's just how high did they go out, how long did they travel, did they sustain that air throughout the pipe.
But there's the same thing also in half pipe where sometimes they kind of go far, but they don't go high. You know, they go really way down, but they went like 5 feet above it. And sometimes they don't go as far down, but they go really high. So
Totally, yeah, and I mean,
how do you see those two different things?
it really so like the main thing I guess we look for in half pipe in terms of amplitude is like maintained consistent good amplitude throughout the half pipe run. So we're not looking necessarily for like one big hit and then a small hit and then three more big hits and then a small hit. We're looking for hits of about the same size throughout the entire half pipe.
Okay.
And we as judges for the most part are looking at the half pipe from the base view. You're not really seeing the distance traveled as much as maybe some of the feeds on TV might lend you to believe.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we're for the most part we're looking just from a standard sitting at the bottom of the half pipe, looking upwards, and the only amplitude we're really taking into account is how high it looks off of the wall. And I guess we don't really, if somebody were to travel 150 feet down the pipe but go 3 feet out, we're not really looking at that as they did something right. You know, like that's not that's not a completing the arc of their trajectory in the half pipe adequately for that contest.
You touched on something really cool that I never thought about, where for a half pipe run, you're not looking at a screen, you're looking at the actual run with your eyes. Whereas for a slope style run, you don't really have a choice because it's so long that you have to go through screens and through the broadcast, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean to be honest, every high level contest is judged 100% off a screen,
Mm.
whether or not you're at the, like, oftentimes at the half pipe, you will be at the base of the half pipe. However, you will still be in a pod judging off a screen in a little TV room, because that's the only really, I mean, it is great to watch with your eyes from the bottom of the half pipe. And I've done that for countless half pipe contests, especially we're talking Rev Tours, North Face Park and Pipe Open. Like every contest prior to maybe the last 4 years that was half pipe was judged just your eyes on it from the bottom of the half pipe. But you do fall victim to, like, did they grab the first one or did it look like they grabbed the first hit? Because that's
Because the first one is kind of really far away. Yeah.
really far away, so the camera feeds really, I feel like, equalize the situation, so we're seeing the same thing on every hit, but it is a standardized camera view. We're watching from the bottom.
Let's get back to the 5 points. We talked about amplitude. Then the next one was
Variety. So variety, obviously, there's so many different ways to look at variety, both in half pipe and in slopestyle. In big air, I guess big air variety is not actually a criteria in there. Um, but yeah, and I mean, variety. The most linear explanation of variety, like as skiing understands it, is left, right, switch left and right. So having to have four different directions of spinning. But then we're also dealing with the axis variation. Like, did that slopestyle run have multiple different axes that we were able to evaluate? Were there multiple different grabs? Did they have switch and forward takeoffs? When we're looking at rails, there's so many different ways to approach rails, whether you're spinning on, spinning off, spinning while on, spinning on, off, continuing, pretzeling spins, continuing spins, backslides, front slides. Like, there's so many different ways to approach rails. So that's where we're really looking into variety. You see a 7 feature slopestyle course, you want to see something different happening on every feature at these high level runs.
and also with grabs, I guess.
Grabs, most definitely, yeah. Like we definitely are looking for people to change up the grabs, and obviously, like, coming from my roots in skiing, like I think mirroring is a really important part of runs that I thought was really cool. When somebody is able to do a trick in one direction and then a trick in the other direction with the same grab, but it's not the same grab because they're doing it in two different directions. So the grab's with the other hand. So like you're looking at half pipe runs, and maybe like Kelly Sildaru's half pipe run. Let's say she's doing left and right fives with trailing tail. It's not the same grab because it's being done with different hands, because she's spinning left and right, so her hand is alternating when she's grabbing those.
Yeah.
But yeah, grabs a very important part of variety. Axes is now becoming, especially in slopestyle, a big defining factor. Like, okay, yeah, we've proven that you guys can all do doubles, if not triples, in 3 different directions. But are they all cork? Are you varying at all in the way that these are done? Or are they all similar to one another? Because again, that, like, going back to that half pipe contest with Ayumu in the Olympics, the only thing that you could really take away from that run with the triple and the 14s was that I think it was 4 out of 5 hits were all, like, relatively in the same direction, whereas Scotty James' run was just unbelievable technicality. Like switchback dub 12 up top, which is just an unbelievably difficult trick in a direction that nobody spins. So
Hmm.
the variety, like, can really set things apart, and make for a more interesting run, the more, yeah, complete run, more or less. That's what we're looking for.
You're right with mirroring tricks. It's something that's always been super cool, and um, that's paid off in X Games. Like Wallish was winning everything, and I think it was 2012 with his back-to-back switched up 10 Japan,
Oh, totally.
and
Yeah,
then I think it was Oystein with his both sides switched up 14 blunt.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
think
the
it
switch
was
up 14s.
2016, maybe he was winning everything with that.
It was 20. It was the year of the Olympics because he did the switch dub 14 blunt to blunt leading up to the Olympics. At I was judging that X Games, and yeah,
So
it was
2018.
2018. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I really, I think mirroring is big in skiing, and it's funny because sometimes I'll be speaking with somebody. Oh, well, he repeated grabs or something. It's like, oh, well, like he did a left 9 lead tail and a right 9 lead tail in that run. It sounds like he did the same thing minus left and right, but the grabs are different. It's mirroring. I really think that's a cool part of free skiing that we need to acknowledge as interesting, you know. But yeah, so I mean, that's the variety aspect of judging as to what we're looking at. Next criteria would be execution, and that execution is really the closest criteria that I'd say you can factor style of any capacity into. Like obviously, style is so subjective. It's not an objective thing that you're able to critique in any way, shape, or form. So it really does come down to execution. Like how did they do the grab? When did they grab in that spin? How did the grab look? Where did they grab on their skis? What did they
Mm,
do with the grab while they had it? How did they land?
right.
Did they have the whole package put together? That's really what execution comes down to, you know. And the landing, was it clean?
When you said execution, my first thought were, did he flail? Like, was there arm waving? And the landing.
Totally,
To
yeah.
me, execution is like, did you stomp the landing or did you put your hands down? But you have a great point with the grabs. Like, did you tweak it super hard? Was it just a slight grab? Um, like, let's say someone does a really good trick, well executed, like a triple 16 mute, let's say, but he's grabbing mute well, but he's also holding on to the knee. What's the knee
Yeah,
situation for execution?
we're I mean, we really definitely are looking at the knees now. Like knees are no longer accepted as something that's able you're able to do in those tricks. And I mean, what you just talked about is actually one of the biggest uphill struggles I feel like I've faced as a judge is grabs. What does a grab mean? Like, a, why do you need to grab? Like there's no rule that says you have to grab necessarily in this sport. However, we understand.
There's no rule. I think that's like the basis. Like, that's JF Cusson, uh, or whoever, like in the 90s, getting, like, as you said, with Wallish getting a zero. There were guys in the moguls in the 90s getting shit scores because they grabbed. That's the essence of the sports, is grabs. No?
Totally, and I agree with that completely because like we all acknowledge that that's something needed to be done, you know. And also it's not a part of aerials, it's not a part of moguls. It really is the thing that seems to make free skiing unique. But uh like in contrast, grabs aren't a requirement, you know. Like you're so there it's not the conversation I have more often than not with coaches. They come down and say, "He got the grab. Why did you score him like that? Like why
Mm,
did he place here? He got the grab." And then that brings me to the question: is what is a grab? Is a grab slapping your ski for 90 degrees of an 1800, or is a grab showing control? And because I think if we refer to a grab as the first one I just mentioned, in which it's making contact with your ski, we're in a dangerous position in which it aligns with form from moguls and aerials, in which they're just looking for a form throughout the entire run. And with grabs, yeah, it really comes down to like, when did they grab in their spin? Did they start their grab at 180 or did they start their grab at 900? Where on their ski did they grab? Grabbing blunt as opposed to grabbing Tindy, grabbing Cindy, as we've been calling the halfway safety, halfway Tindy, that people have been doing lately. Um, like the length of grab, the execution of the grab, what they did with the grab while holding it. I think that really says a lot more about grabs than did they get it or did they not, you know. And I think that's what really dictates the sport at a high level right now. Like you mentioned, an arm flail or a landing, like those are huge components of it. But at a really high level, we don't see that. Like I can see people do a two switch step 18s with perfect landings, looks like they got a grab, and they neither of them flailed. And then you were to really, okay, now I need to take inventory. One of these needs to place higher than the other. Realize, okay, well, this person grabbed at 180 and held till 14 versus this person that grabbed at 9 and then held till 16. Um,
mhm.
what do you like? What do you place more value on? And it has to be length of grab, like
Yeah,
distinguished.
well,
How distinguished was the grab?
that goes back to the unwritten rules that we were talking about. To me, that's a clear unwritten rule is, well, you need to grab it a while. Like when I see people doing, let's say, dub 16s, where the first one is a cork 10, and when the cork 10 has no grab and it's just wrapped,
Totally,
that's a
yeah. And
no no for
we
me. I see
hammer it,
that
you
and I'm
know.
like, that's not how it's supposed to be.
Exactly. And I mean that we really have tried to make a distinction about that. And then like I mean, there are competitors that really did try to take that route a couple years ago, and okay, I can spin a full 360 more than everybody else.
Hmm.
However, I need to wrap a 10 before as the intro to this trick. So like I can do a 19, but the first 10 isn't going to be grabbed, and that was something that we as judges like looked at and were like, okay, like we can't really reward this on the same level that we would reward somebody doing a 19 4 years ago with a grab from 360. So it really is that free skiing. I'd argue it is because they're finding a different route to achieve something unique within this sport. However, uh, yeah, how much are we going to reward it in the contest compared to people that are doing things that align more typically with the values of the sport, let's say.
To go back to what you said earlier, it really surprises me that grabs are not a requirement per se. Because if you go back to the essence of free skiing and like, what if a gaper or someone who's not knowledgeable about free skiing asks me what's the difference, and I have to explain it simply, it's grabs.
Totally.
Like, hey, what's the difference between aerials and big air? Well, it's kind of the same thing, but they do grabs. Or it's or you kind of go to the snowboarding comparison. It's like, yeah, you know what snowboarders do? Well, it's like that in skiing. Because,
Exactly. Yeah.
anyways, it's kind of dumb, but the it seems like the most basic requirement would be grabs.
Totally. But then you also look at like, so what is free skiing? And then if free skiing is grabs, you look at Wallish's zero spin at Mount Hood in what 2008, 2009 with no grab, and does that not qualify as free
Yeah,
skiing because that he doesn't grab? There was no attempt at a grab. That was just a switch straight air, and um,
man, judging is so deep.
exactly. Yeah. There's uh,
Because you made me think of a good thing like that when you want to get, like, let's say, play devil's advocate. Let's say, um, holding on to a grab longer is always better. And you can say spinning more is most of the time better. Like, let's say you
more
think
or
of a
less. Yeah.
switch 18. It's gonna be, if both tricks are good, like a switch 10 versus a switch 18, the switch 18 will win. It's more
Totally. Yeah. On
difficult,
on
whatever.
sheer difficulty. Yeah.
But then I think back to, there were bigger comps where Vinny won with a, I don't know if you were judging, but Vincent Gagne, he won with
Switch three.
switch three, like
Exactly.
switch
Yeah.
core
Switch five
three,
revert. Exactly.
revert, pretzel, however you want to call it. Um,
I wasn't at that one particularly. However, I think our sport has been set up for a ton of. I mean, Alex Hall at the Olympics is a perfect example of this. His last jump was a 900. Uh, everyone else is doing 16s on that jump. He's doing a 900, and he won the Olympics. And it's because there are less than linear approaches to difficulty in skiing, and that's what I feel like we always, need to promote are these like how are people figuring out ways to progress this sport in ways that are difficult at a really high level, but are not conventional in the terms of spinning or flipping more because we're gonna hit a limit if we're not there already. Like I really don't know. Every year I come into it saying, can they really do another 360 than they did last year? Is that really even physically possible? And then I'm shown, yeah, they can. Alex did the 2160. Matei's been doing 19s like it's nobody's business. We're seeing a lot of 19s. But when does that stop? Like when does that progression stop? And there has to be other ways to progress that do not involve rotation in the linear sense of just spinning more. So I really, when Vinny won that one with the Switch 3, I loved it. Like I thought that was a huge statement for free skiing, but it probably confused the rest of the world.
yeah.
And then I don't know if you remember a couple years, I guess this is quite a while ago now. Henrik dropped a video in which he did the first ever rodeo 180. And it was like he maybe released it in early January, and then the next contest that was coming up was X Games, and we all knew that he had this rodeo one in his bag, just like this lofty flat three that he like holds at 180 and brings back to his feet. And he never did it in the contest. He never landed at X Games, but
Mm,
I was ready for that trick to happen. And in my opinion, at the time, it was unbeatable. If he lands a rodeo 180, that wins everything. I don't a 16, 18, I don't care. A rodeo 180, there's that's that's physics defying. That's
yeah.
that's like progressing in a way that I really did not even think possible, comprehensible even.
Yeah, when you talk about that trick, the only one I have in mind is his level one shot from After Dark, where it's like a quarter pipe transfer.
I think it was a couple years after that, and it wasn't a video part. It was like he did his summer spring edit and then just didn't release it until the fall. And that the jump he did it on was maybe 40 feet, and at the time, like I had really never seen anybody do the flat 180. And I feel like that trick's more or less people have figured it out now. But at the time, and I mean, same with Vinny's trick. Vinny doing that, people figured that trick out, and Vinny also figured out very quickly that it took a special jump and a special day and the right circumstance for progression within that sport for that trick to win that day. He came into a contest a couple weeks later, and he didn't even make finals with the same trick.
Okay.
Good or bad, as to what that says about progression, like competing for that specific jump, but that was the case. And I think there are opportunities for stuff like that to really shift the progression of skiing in general. I know a lot of these competitors now are working on tricks that do involve spinning a considerable amount in one direction and then a considerable amount more than a 180 in the other direction, like switch 9 to pull back 5 situation. Um, like, where does that weigh in against a switch dub 2160?
We'll get to talk about how many different tricks there are and how much variety there is. But one example that I had was a ABM who I had on the podcast last year right after X Games, and we talked a bit about judging because there was some controversy a bit. And he was saying, "Man, I don't have any issues because it's the hardest job in the world right now." Like, he was basically saying like, respect to the judges and you do your thing because it's like he wouldn't want to be in your shoes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing I feel like I can always rely on is this job will never be easy or sought after necessarily. I feel like we've had the privilege of over the past couple of years bringing some athletes into the booth uh, at high level events, at X Games, at Dew Tour, and everything. And the one thing that really stood out, or I guess two things I'll say that stood out to me about that is the athletes in most cases do not fully understand the system by which they're being judged, and definitely do not understand how we go about coming to those decisions, what goes on in the booth, how hard we're scrutinizing everything, what is actually going into that evaluation. And more often than not, the athletes will come out of that booth and be like, I have a new take on this. I'm not messing with you anymore. Like I've said my last negative thing about judging. You guys are doing your best, right or wrong. That's all we can really try to do. We're humans, and it's incredibly difficult. And the sport is progressing at a rate that is unprecedented. And that we definitely get things wrong. Like we look at things a couple years later, and if judging by my understanding of the sport now, it could have a completely different podium if I'm rejudging a contest from 2018.
Yeah.
But it is a very complicated job, and something too that at times I think, wow, if I really knew where this was going to go, like, is this something that I actually would have been interested in participating in? Like, I never ever thought that I was going to be judging more than a couple local contests a year when I started doing this, and then for me to like somehow now I'm judging X Games, and I'm like literally again, coming from an era prior to the Olympics, the X Games were my Olympics. Like me getting to judge the X Games, that was, oh my god, I never got to compete here. This is the highest level I could ever hope to achieve in this. But at, why me? Like, how did I find myself in this position in which this is not only my role but my problem? Like I genuinely feel like the judge side of the sport is now my baby. That can I walk away and leave this in the hands of anyone and make sure that it'll be all right moving into the future? Like that's the scary reality.
A big thing that I think people have sometimes that seems unfair to me with judges is that there's kind of this assumption that it's some clueless guy that doesn't know shit about skiing. I don't know why. It seems like it's the harshest critique. Like, I think they made a mistake, so it has to be someone who doesn't know shit, right? But then a lot of times I see the judging sheet or like who was behind it, and it's like one of the three Phils who's basically an inventor of the sport, and then it's yourself who's a a really knowledgeable guy who's been in it for a long time. And a lot of times you see the people behind it and you're like, man, it would be hard to find someone who knows more about skiing than these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree, and that's also like one of the most hurtful statements I think at the Olympics. It wasn't even directed at us, but I was reading through the comments of that whole slopestyle judging debacle with Max versus Mark, and the comments that I kept seeing were, "This is what happens when you let skiers judge snowboarding," and I was like, "Man, that's harsh," because the snowboard judges have like you might disagree with the way that contest came out, but there is 100 years. No, there's got to be way more. There's probably 150 to 175 years of snowboarding experience on that panel.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's 10 dudes that have been at the very least snowboarding and involved deeply with snowboarding for 15 years minimum each. Like there's snowboard judges that have been judging longer than I've been alive, and have been involved with this sport. But on the free skiing front, like it is really interesting because people are who are these judges? Like a bunch of old dudes that don't get it, and it is interesting because I can speak for the fact that every single judge that I work with cares about this sport in a way that probably isn't healthy. I mean, I like to say that like we're ski nerds. All of us really really care about this sport. There's nobody that's just stepping in off the street with no experience and dictating this sport because they were the guy decided upon that's judging that day. Like this is a lot of dedication and a lot of energy. And like you said, like Phil LaRose judging the Olympics, like for anyone that doesn't know who he is or what he's contributed to this sport, what are you doing participating in a sport in which you don't fully understand the founding of it and can pay homage to that kind of stuff, and the last Olympics with Steele Spence and Bellinger judging that one, like that's huge to be judged by those people that meant that much to skiing in their day and age. Like we're literal pioneers of this sport and are taking the time to be involved because they care about the future of this sport. And that's really all that the judges are, is we're ski nerds that care about the future of this sport.
I think that's something that's really lacking in free skiing is the historical context. Where, let's say, if you're a football fan in the States or in Canada, because we watch the NFL also, you always have these ESPN things where they do a 30-minute to talk about an old legend and tell you how good he was, and
Totally.
like keep
Yeah, I mean,
that legend alive. And it seems that, let's say you're an 18-year-old these days, you might not know who Phil Larose is or Phil Bélan or Steele Spence, but there should be someone telling you, because if you say that those guys don't know shit, then you sound like a complete idiot, and it's kind of sad that you don't know who they are. And it's normal. Like JF Fool is coaching the Team Quebec kids that are like, let's say, between 16 and 19, and he was telling me like he had to show them all the classics because no one showed them, or they didn't. It was natural. Like they never saw it, and he was like taking some time to be a history teacher for skiing to see like
yeah,
to say like, hey, there were these legends in Quebec and in the scene in general, and
like even what
this
you
is
just
who
said,
came before you.
JF is coaching a group of kids. Like there's no way that those kids even understand who they're being coached by.
I try to tell them, like when I come across a few of them, I'm like, do you understand who you're getting coached by? Like
Well,
in the
I'm
spectrum
mad
of
at
your
these.
sport.
I mean, the Canadian national, like JF is Jeff Cousson is the one of the coaches on the Canadian team. Like Liam Downey is coaching in the East Coast. TJ Schiller is coaching these things now. I look at these kids and I don't care what their understanding of these guys is. It's not the understanding I have as to how much they personally shaped my life and my childhood by what they did for this sport. Like TJ Schiller, it's still crazy to me. Like that dude is uh, I don't know if I could ever call him an equal because he's just like I still hold him in such high regard. But seeing him at contests and he's coaching, it's like I I can't even imagine how lucky I would have felt to have been coached by that dude at any point in my life, just based on everything he brought to the table. Like he was I was obsessed with his skiing for years. Like it was Dave Crichton was my initial like favorite skier I'd ever seen. His part and forward. was unbelievable. I was also obsessed with Liam Downey's part in Forward. And then TJ Schiller like burst onto the scene in X equals 10. And that was the dude I dressed a different way after watching that movie because I wanted to be like that dude. And these guys are coaching the future now, and these kids don't understand, you know. And at the same time, like the world in general, I guess, is just short sighted nowadays and not really understanding of that stuff. But in the more, I guess, established sports, we'll say basketball, football, baseball, hockey, they do a really good job of like giving a better understanding as to the past of the sport. Because if you play basketball and didn't know who Michael Jordan is, like what who taught you to play basketball? You know, that's like the a key figure in the history of the sport that makes learning it relevant. You know.
Yeah. But even there's these things like I'm not an NBA fan at all. Like I'm one of the less knowledgeable guys you'll meet. And when I saw The Last Dance, I don't know if you saw it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, when I saw The Last Dance, it put a lot of things in context to me because let's say I knew that Steve Kerr was the coach of the Warriors. Was that it?
yeah, the Warriors.
I
Yeah,
knew he was the coach, but was he a nobody? I didn't know. And then I saw that I was like, oh, okay, shit, okay, he was part of all of that, and oh shit, okay, new respect found for him
totally.
of like he's not a nobody. But to me, I
Yeah,
didn't know Steve Kerr
exactly.
was a player. Like,
Totally. I mean, and that's a yeah. I mean, people still like ask me all the time, like have no understanding of my history as a skier, for which I don't assume anybody should. Like I had such a minimal history of as a skier, but like, oh, how'd you get involved with judging? It's like, well, it seems obvious to say, but I used to do this sport. Like that's the only way you would really become involved with it. But yeah, people just, I mean, there's so much of the history of the sport tied up in the current day of the sport, and it is interesting to see people just not understanding who is out there around them, like that they're working with. And I mean, yeah, the youth in general, I just feel like um, there's so much history, and it's like now all in DVD form. So like, are these kids finding DVD players and watching the whole like Poor Boys saga before it turned into something that wasn't watchable anymore?
yeah, I'm right in there with you. But yeah, I think that's something that Meatheads and Level One did a good thing by posting their first 10 movies, marketing wise and just for the culture. But I think that's something Poor Boys and like every company should do because for the culture, for the history, and then are they really making any money out of the movie from 2003? I'm not sure.
Total and inspired for years was like posting all of the old movies, like really really old cultural movies, and I think that was really like a lot of these new school kids, that's the only way that they can gain knowledge about the past of the sport. And the videos are grainier than they're used to now, but at the same time it's like that really, yeah, the origins of the sport I do feel like line up well to where we are now, and it does make sense to invest in learning a bit about that stuff before participating in these sports long term.
Yeah. But I think the kind of distance or the assumption that someone from the industry is clueless is something that's kind of common to all sports. Like I think back to the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens was fired this year, and a lot of people like he had a last tough couple of years, and people were saying like bashing him and saying he doesn't know shit and he's clueless. And the guy, he wasn't a star, but before being a general manager, he played in the league for like 20 years and played over 1,000 games. So it's like
Oh, totally.
I'm sure he's not that dumb. Like I think he knows a bit about hockey, a bit more than you guys, but there's always kind of that. Is it is it linked to social media a bit that like um eagerness to bash everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I just think yeah, anyone's looking for any reason to call into question like judging specifically, like when we're talking about that, we're talking about, oh, are these guys a bunch of nobodies? Like never. I mean, I'll refer to myself as a never was. Like I'm not a has been, but somebody that never really achieved what I maybe thought I was going to in skiing. But like again, that just was able to, yeah, shift my focus into another realm, judging, in which we're now hyper focused, and all the guys that we work with. And I remember prior to the last Olympics, I was getting a lot of questions. I mean, not 2022, but 2018. I was getting a lot of questions saying, "Are you judging? Are you going out there?" And it's like, no, I'm like way behind on the list to go out to this one. Like, well, who's judging? Like, if you're not there, it must be a bunch of idiots. It's like I can assure you, it's not a bunch of idiots. Like this judging crew, especially, I hold in very high regard, and I would trust to do anything. And same with this past Olympics. Like I wasn't a judge on this past. I was there. I was a part of the crew. I was with them, but I was not a part of the official panel. And I trust the hell out of all those people that were on that panel typing in scores. And for anybody to assume, like, another comment I read on New Schoolers right after slopestyle, or no, maybe no, it was after Big Air, was I really wish that they would get these judges together and practice with this group of judges at judging a little bit before the Olympics. And it was like, okay, dude, like, so I'm just going to assume you just crawled out from under a rock and are just making a statement just to type something out on your screen that you feel the need everyone now needs to read. But like, everyone that was judging this Olympics not only has been judging for the majority of the past 10 years, but spent the 3 months prior to the Olympics on the road at every single contest to be better prepared for that contest.
Well, maybe for these haters, can you just give a quick rundown of who was the actual judges at the Olympics?
Yeah, most definitely. So head judge was David Ortlieb from Switzerland. And then obviously this is an SBS judging panel, so many more judges than would be on a traditional OI. So 10 judges total, I believe.
Wait.
So
SPS, OI, can you?
yeah. So sorry, OI being overall impression. That's the way we traditionally have judged, and usually in an OI overall impression judging panel, you'll have 5 to 6 judges plus a scoring judge. For SBS, section by section judging, that was invented by snowboarding, used at the Olympics, is possibly one of the first time people have seen it, but it has been used in World Cups for the past several years, only in slopestyle. It breaks it into sections. So you have 2 judges evaluating 2 sections, 2 more judges evaluating the next 2 sections, the last 2 judges evaluating the 5th and 6th sections, and then 3 judges judging overall. So we can go back into the SBS difference in a moment.
Seems weird.
Yeah, it's a way to mitigate responsibility. It's a way so you have more eyes looking just at one particular feature, and the course is broken down
right.
feature by feature. So we can touch on that in a moment,
Yeah.
but I'll go through these guys so I don't forget that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the judging panel was Phil LaRose, Canada, Ian Meter, USA, Chiho Takao from Japan, Adam Frisell from Sweden, Vegard Oye from Norway, Tobias Grotz from Austria, Vincent Worley from Germany, Victoria Beattie from New Zealand, and Charlie Royer from France. How did I forget Charlie? So 10 judges in total. It's 9 plus a head judge for SBS.
Okay.
And then I was there as the trick caller.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about SPS and then we can get into trick calling, because that's something super cool that I didn't even know existed. It seems like you may lose the whole because slopestyle to me has always been a either you get your full run or you don't. Like if you mess up one feature, it's done for.
Totally.
It seems to me like SPS would kind of go away from that.
Yeah, so SBS was created more so as a way to give the athletes as well as the viewers a better tool to understand the scoring of the run, so that you could actually look through and track, okay, he scored in the 90th percentile on feature 1. He got like a 60 on feature 2, so that's what hit him. He was in first place on feature 3, first place on 4, 6th place on 5, so you can actually look through a run now and actually look at what score you were assigned per feature and then your overall run score. Because with SBS, you'll get a score for feature 1, feature 2, feature 3, all the way through down the course, which equates for 60% of your score. That's determined usually by 6 judges. And each feature, obviously, if it's worth 60%, each feature would roughly be worth 10% of your score. Then the other 40% is determined by the overall impression judges that are judging off more so like relatively similar to the overall impression of the past, but limiting it to 40%, where they're really evaluating the variety and composition of the run, how the whole run came together as a whole. So that's SBS.
Even in SPS, they have the 5 The five things that they're looking at: amplitude,
Five
variety.
criteria, yeah. So those are the same criteria throughout everything in skiing, and again, like ski judging as a whole was created. So the numbers you see that are tossed out as scores have no meaning or had no meaning in traditional contest skiing. It's 100% ranking. Those numbers are just used as a tool for us to set up a ranking that is correct at the end of the day. So the difference between scoring a 92 on a run and a 97 on a run is irrelevant if that person still finished in first place or still finished where they needed to in the contest.
To me, it always seemed like it was actually what 0 to 100 being 0, you fall on the first feature, let's say, and 100 being the best run that was ever done at that moment in skiing, kind of.
Yeah, and I mean, I've always held the 100 as the perfect run, like the unachievable run, the run that physically could not happen. The hey, that was the perfect run, but he could have added an extra 180 here. They could have done this there, and that would have theoretically upped that run. You know?
Well, for a while, it seemed like that didn't exist, and the perfect run would be like, let's say, 96. But then it seemed like there was an odd thing where, that whole time when Sean White got 100 and all that thing, it seemed more like a marketing thing.
I mean, the 100 is like hotly contested in skiing as a whole because like we haven't had it. And like again, my principle about it is a 99 is achievable, a 100 is not. However, with the scoring system that we're using, a 100 is just a placeholder. It's a tool. And if you get to the end of the contest and you've already given out a 99, then you've got to give out a 100 if that person wins it, you know. But that's really the only scenario in which somebody can achieve a 100. But in general judging, the ranking is the only thing that matters. Whenever anyone comes and says, "Why did I get an 86?" Well, you finished in fourth place. Look at third place. That run was better than yours because of these reasons. This is why you finished there. Well, why an 86? Well, because they already had an 88. They went before you, and we had to slot you in below. Was your score lower than a previous week? Maybe. However, it's based on that contest, and this is just a way to achieve ranking. However, when you get into SBS, that's when scores actually count because they're being added together. You're giving a score that is not being discussed throughout the rest of the judging panel, and then it's being thrown into an equation and spit out uh, with a weight on it, you know, like worth 60% versus 40% of your score. So that it kind of like conflicts with maybe a little bit of the ideals of for which free ski judging has been based on over the past several years, being just ranking based.
Something that I think must be really hard in the overall impression things, where you're saying that everything is centered around rankings, is that I've done a lot of judging myself as a TV watcher, where I get a sheet of paper and take notes and
Yeah,
judge for fun. And a big thing that I always found myself having a hard time with is the memory part, where if everyone has 7 features and you have 30 athletes, 30 times 7, there's 210 features.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
lot to
exactly,
remember. And then, as you said, you're always kind of comparing, like, oh, was a Nick as good as Bobby and whatever? You're comparing different runs to see, like, would I place him fifth or fourth or whatever? But then you have to remember, like, oh, his good run was his first run, and now we're at the third run. And was his second rail good? Like,
totally,
there's so much memory involved. How do you guys deal with that, of remembering? Because I said 7 features times 30 riders. Let's say there's two, like in a final there would be 10. So 70 times 3 runs, you go back to 200 features. Someone may have landed his first run in the early stages of the first run, and someone might land his at the end of the contest in his third run. And
totally.
like, how does it work remembering? Because as you said, you're kind of comparing. It's not the score itself. It's like, where does he place in comparison to the other one?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, we are, that is a major component of judging is the fact that we are taking notes throughout the entire thing. Obviously, our steno or our stenograph or our memory board, that we're actually taking detailed notes of every run as they come down, feature by feature, mistake by mistake, grab by grab, rotation by rotation. All of that's accounted for on our stenos that we're using as our shorthand notes to be able to discuss these runs for the rest of the contest and remember when they did their landed run versus when they slightly fell off of this rail, when they let go of that grab early on run 3. This is the run we're talking about. This is the run we're looking at.
Yeah.
But the other thing about free ski judging that's unique to, I mean, really any other judging in that I've been experienced with is the communal nature of it. Like free ski judging is very verbal. Like, I mean, not very verbal. Like, obviously, everybody's relying on their own understanding of the sport and their knowledge of what just happened and where it should fit in. But there is discussion, and it is more of a roundtable quickly as to air grievances, talk about why something should or shouldn't be placing above that, and then coming to a quick conclusion about where it ends. And if it needs to come down to a vote, it needs to come down to a vote. But then scoring that rider so that they rank where they need to overall. So it is a very something that's being talked through for the entire time. I thought it was at the Olympics, Burke Ruud on his victory lap got the 69 across, and everyone, oh, this is clear proof of collusion within the judging, and it's like, no, if you understood ski judging as a whole, you'd understand that it's not, there's nothing against everybody talking with one another. Like the whole process is to fact check one another and to be able to make sure that everybody saw the same thing, everybody was evaluating the same thing, comprehending and evaluating against the same thing. It doesn't need to be you have your own opinion, and that needs to stay how it is. However, there can be a conversational aspect of it.
Yeah.
And when the 69 happened, not only did that fit in within the range that they had already set that day, it kind of was spot on with the score that it needed to be. And I thought it was funny that people like, I thought it was hilarious. I thought that was the best way for that big air to end. But everybody really that was commenting, I guess it was just general Facebook moms commenting, well, this is clear proof of collusion. It's like, no, it's actually just the judging system kind of allowed for this one-time funny opportunity, and they took it.
Well, from my end of it, from the feedback I saw on social, it was all like, oh, this is the best thing ever. This is the coolest thing ever. So
everyone loved it. Yeah, I think I think that I feel very fortunate, especially like David Ortley preparing for this Olympics really he really wanted to do a good job, especially first time SBS was coming to the Olympics. He really took a big leadership role with this crew as to make sure that there was nothing that would be looked at as the reason that something got messed up after the fact. And then obviously snowboarding happening the way that it did, that was all compounded by the day of the event. So David was being very, very meticulous and just making sure that everything was on track and looking good, because we did not want to be the reason the contest was talked about, like that's the worst thing, is when the contest ends and the only thing anyone's talking about is the judging. That's never ever what you want to happen at a contest. You want it to be about the event and how it ended in the way that everybody that at least the sport wanted it to end or needed it to end for it to be accurate.
So yeah, basically when a run is landed, you all have your opinions, you discuss together, but you all go back to having your own score. It's not as you're all debating to have one score. It's you debate to have a clear understanding of each other, and then you all have your individual scores.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a debate to have a clear understanding of what everyone's point is, and like to make sure that the entire that nothing was left out in like the comprehension of where that run should be. And then ultimately the scores are different. People do have different ranges, and somebody might disagree and want to keep their score above another score, therefore having them ranked higher than another one. And in free ski judging, that's totally acceptable. You are allowed to do that. However, the majority dictates the rank, obviously. If 5 people think one way and one thinks the other, the score and ranking needs to reflect what the 5 judges thought, not what the one outlier said.
So this is it for episode 30 with Jason Arens. I hope you enjoyed our talk. Part 2 will be dropping soon, so be on the lookout for that. Big thanks to the sponsors again, Access Board Shop, Planks Clothing, and Dick Ann's Restaurants. Peace!